Okay, so you know how we all have those like kind of quirky fears, right?
Hmm.
Like some people are afraid of spiders, some
Yeah.
people clowns, the drill.
Right.
But have you ever heard of someone being afraid of bubbles?
Bubbles.
Yeah, like soap bubbles.
Huh. Huh. I can't say that I have.
It's a real thing. It's called bubblephobia. We're going to dive into that today.
Wow. Okay. That's that's a new one. Where are we learning about this?
So there's this article from Cheap ABA. It's called Autistic Fears, the Case of Bubbles. And it's actually super interesting.
Okay, autistic fears. So I'm guessing this is about more than just, kids being afraid of bubbles in the bathtub.
Exactly. It's about how for people on the autism spectrum who, as you know, experience the world a bit differently than neurotypical folks,
Right. Right.
simple things like bubbles can actually be really scary.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So why bubbles? What makes them so frightening for someone on the spectrum?
Well, the article dives into a bunch of different reasons. Sensory overload's the big
The
one.
sensory overload, right?
I mean, think about it. The colors, the movement, it's a lot to take in.
And for someone with heightened sensory sensitivities, that could be really overwhelming.
Exactly. And then there's the whole unexpected movement thing. Like bubbles, they just kind of float around. You never know which way they're going to go next.
And that unpredictable kind of erratic movement, that can be really unsettling, even for people who aren't on the spectrum.
For sure. But especially for folks who thrive on routine and predictability, like a lot of autistic individuals do.
Right, right. Disruptions to that routine can be really anxiety-inducing. I see where this is going.
Yeah. And then on top of all that, you've got tactile defensiveness.
Which is,
Oh, sorry. It's basically like a heightened sensitivity to touch.
okay.
So imagine how uncomfortable it would be to have a bubble, land on you and burst.
Yeah, not a pleasant experience for anyone, really, but I can see how that would be amplified for someone with tactile defensiveness.
Totally. And the thing is, it's not just about the immediate sensory experience either. This is where it gets really interesting. The article talks about something called associative learning.
Okay, and what's that?
So basically, it means that past experiences, especially negative ones, can have a huge impact on how we react to things in the present.
I see, like a bad memory associated with bubbles.
Exactly.
Oh.
Like, let's say a child had a really bad experience with bubbles in the past, like maybe they got a bunch of soap in their eyes or something.
Oof, yeah, I can see how that would be traumatic.
Right. And so even years later, the mere sight of a bubble might trigger that negative memory and cause a fear response.
So it's like this whole web of sensory challenges, anxieties, past experiences, all tangled up, and bubbles just happen to be the thing that sets it off.
Exactly. So, okay, we've talked about why some people on the spectrum might develop this fear of bubbles.
Right.
But what can you do about it?
Right. Because who wants to live in a world without bubbles?
Exactly. So the article, it does offer some solutions, thankfully.
Okay, good. What does it say?
Well, one thing it talks about is this idea of gradual exposure.
Gradual exposure. So like slowly introducing bubbles into the person's environment.
Yeah, exactly. But like in a very controlled and systematic way.
Right. So you're not just like throwing them into a bubble bath and hoping for the best.
Exactly. It would probably start with something like, I don't know, maybe showing pictures of bubbles.
Okay.
And then like, if that goes well, maybe you show them some videos of bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, you work your way up to actual real life bubbles.
Right. But each step of the way, you're making sure the person is comfortable and not getting overwhelmed.
Exactly. It's all about taking it slow and steady.
Makes sense. So what about like those sensory tools we were talking about earlier? Could those be helpful here?
Definitely. Like the article specifically mentions noise canceling headphones, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, to block out the popping sound?
Exactly. That way you can still, enjoy the visual aspect of the bubbles without having to deal with that, like, startling sound.
I like it. What about like a weighted blanket?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That could be really helpful for, like, grounding and providing a sense of security during the exposure process.
Yeah, I can see that. Or even something as simple as a fidget toy.
Totally. Anything to help redirect that nervous energy.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
So it seems like it's not necessarily about making the bubbles go away completely.
Right.
It's more about equipping individuals with the tools and strategies they need to manage their own sensory experiences.
Exactly. And, speaking of tools and strategies, the article also talks about CBT.
CBT, as in cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. But how does that work with something like a fear of bubbles?
So basically, CBT is all about identifying and then challenging those unhelpful thought patterns that contribute to anxiety and fear.
Okay, so like what kind of thoughts are we talking about here?
Well, with bubble phobia, it might be something like, bubbles are dangerous, or if a bubble touches me, something bad is going to happen.
Right, those kind of catastrophic thoughts.
Yeah. And so with CBT, you work with a therapist to kind of like examine those thoughts and see if they're actually true.
And I'm guessing in most cases they're not, right?
Exactly. Bubbles, for the most part, are pretty harmless.
Right. So CBT can help reframe those fears and replace them with more, realistic and balanced thoughts.
Exactly. It's about retraining your brain to react differently to the trigger.
Mm.
So we're talking about retraining your brain, right? Like literally changing the way you think about bubbles.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're teaching your brain to hit the brakes on that fear response.
Okay, I like that analogy, but how do you actually do that besides CBT?
Well, the article also mentions relaxation techniques as being really helpful.
Relaxation techniques? Okay. Like what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, things like deep breathing exercises, for example.
Okay, sure. Those are always good for like calming down in any situation, really.
Exactly. And meditation can be really powerful too.
Yeah, meditation is great for like just kind of getting out of your head and into your body.
Absolutely. And then there's also this thing called progressive muscle relaxation. Have you ever heard of that?
Progressive muscle relaxation. I don't think so. What is that?
So basically, you go through each part of your body, like starting with your toes, and you tense up those muscles really tight, and then you release.
Oh, interesting. So you're kind of like manually releasing the tension in your body.
Exactly. And that can be really helpful for managing anxiety because it's hard to be anxious when your body is relaxed.
That makes sense. So it's like you're giving your body a different signal, right? Instead of that fight or flight response, it's more like, okay, we're safe. We can chill out.
Exactly. You're basically hitting the reset button on your nervous system. And the best part is, these techniques, they're not just for bubble phobia.
Right. That can be helpful for like all sorts of anxiety-provoking situations.
Exactly. Whether it's public speaking or taking a test or even just dealing with everyday stressors, having those tools in your back pocket can make a huge difference.
Totally. It's funny. We started off talking about bubbles, and now we're talking about like all these different ways to manage anxiety and create a more inclusive world.
It's true. But I think that's kind of the beauty of this, right? Like something as simple as a fear of bubbles, it can actually teach us so much about neurodiversity and empathy and the importance of meeting people where they are.
I love that. It's about recognizing that everyone experiences the world in their own unique way.
Exactly. And that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to, well, anything really.
So true. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a lot to think about.
Absolutely.
And who knows, maybe it's even inspired you to learn more about sensory processing and how we can all create a more inclusive world for everyone. Until next time.
See you then.